Corbolic V2. This is a super safe and effective natural anabolic. Not only is this product going to help you increase protein synthesis, which basically means muscle recovery and growth, it also may inhibit myostatin, which is a protein in your body that is known to inhibit muscle growth. This is a complete natural anabolic that works through multiple different pathways, has multiple trademarked ingredients. If you are a natural athlete looking for that edge, Corbolic V2 is what you need. Get yourself some.
By the way, is it just me or does everybody feel like shit right now? Because like everybody I talk to is like, yo, I'm so tired. I have no energy. Like
Yes.
there is no zest in life. It is unseasoned AF.
Unseasoned AF. Yes. I agree. I should have known you were going to do that. I've figured out as I edit podcasts, you only do it to me. And then I forget that you're going to come at me with that one. But I have noticed that actually. And I'd be curious, Adam, have you seen that with like check-ins that everyone just feels kind of like they're dragging a little bit?
I guess a little bit. I think it's that weird moment where we're at the tail end of school and we're almost there to summer and we're looking forward to our vacations and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
yeah. And the
So
weather's been very strange, at least where I'm at. It's been like really hot and now it's like this morning it was like 40 something. So it's just like what the fuck is going on? I just want it to actually be spring.
thank you. Yes, I've been telling Denver that all day. We just had, well, we didn't get snow. We got rain. Thank God. They said it was going to snow like 2 days ago, and then it's going to be 80 tomorrow. And I'm just like, pick a thing, man. So welcome back, guys. Prophecy Code. Here we are. You've got Stephen and Christina, and then we have Adam joining us today. Super excited to get him on. It's Adam's first time as Dr. Adam, which is very cool. And so we're going to dive in a little bit more into his dissertation and in a way that helps all of us kind of understand the usefulness of it, not just kind of like what he learned in the methods and things like that, but where they're super useful and like how this can be something that gets used to help people be more effective when it comes to what they're trying to accomplish and things like that. So I'm really excited to dive in here a little bit more. Oh, what, Stephen?
By the way, Christina, you don't have to call him doctor if you have a graduate degree, apparently. That's what I was told by like Campbell and all of our professors at USF. They're like, you don't have to call me doctor anymore now that you have your graduate degree. I was like, all right, cool.
Oh, we're in the cool kids club.
Yeah, so I refuse to call him doctor.
Oh no, it's too fun. I'm gonna give it to him all day.
I would prefer just Coach Adam is fine.
Yeah, until you start like just hanging out with the stethoscope around your neck all day, then I'll call you doctor.
Watch out. Now I'm gonna get him like a white lab coat.
Yes.
With like a Pokeball on it. Oh, I've got all the ideas. Yeah.
I wore the Pokemon shirt for him.
Oh,
So
good.
Shout out.
Very, very nice. I don't have any, but if it helps, I did have to go on a Pokestop today while my husband battled some large creature. So I did experience Pokemon this morning. So why don't we so what I was thinking was we kind of just start with like if you were talking to somebody who has no idea about what you did in school or about coaching, like the industry, that kind of stuff, how would you explain what you just accomplished and what you were working on?
Yeah, I accomplished a PhD, which is a terminal degree, meaning that there's no more school after this, thankfully. I've spent more than half of my life in school, which is mind-boggling, especially as a person that would fall asleep in high school. He skipped his AP exams. He didn't show up to a lot of his undergrad classes his freshman and sophomore year. So it's weird to say that, I went to get my PhD, but what I always say is if you find your purpose, you'll find your passion. And I think I found mine. So my research pitch typically is my goal is to bridge the gap between research and practice, especially in exercise psychophysiology. We know the physiology. We know it makes us healthy. It makes us quote unquote feel good, but there's a lot of more complexities into that, especially when you start to integrate the psychological aspect of exercise. And I'll go as far as even like the nutritional side of things. We know good nutrition is going to provide a whole host of health benefits, but we still have a lot of room to go, especially integrating the psychological piece. And that's my goal, is to help bridge that gap. And in doing so, hopefully actually make practitioners more evidence-based. And we hear that term thrown out a little bit, or I should say a lot of bit. But again, it's only heavily focused on the physiology rather than integrating both the physiology and psychology.
So you've essentially become Dr. Kilpatrick, is what you're saying.
Respectfully, no. Because so again, I even take a bigger picture, right? The research or practice gap, like your paradigm or your thoughts of what is quote unquote true or what you want to actually implement in your research. I take a pragmatic approach. So if my research does not actually work in practice, I don't really, and again, respectfully, these are opinions of my own. I don't really care about the research. A lot of the other individuals that are focusing on muscle size and strength and that argument of periodization that we've probably had on this podcast, I believe, make really cool arguments. But what I care about is my intervention, not going to just work in a lab because, again, it's highly controlled. I want to know if it actually works in the real world. And that's what I did with my dissertation.
But I mean, isn't that like when you get down to brass tacks, isn't that the real issue for health? And we'll sure go and put that onto fitness after health. Is it like, okay, we know what's good for us. We know having vegetables is good, but fucking it's not a sweet treat, and I want to treat myself. We know that, exercise is important, but man, I'm just a little bit tired. And even if going outside would make me feel a little bit better, I just kind of I'm gonna catch up on the show. Like so the actuality of exercise and doing it, like there's just this huge divide of what we know is good for us and then what we're willing to actually do.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point and hits a really big blind spot of our field where we rely on the rational educational model, where I'm just going to continuously feed you more and more and more information and forget that we actually are humans and we have feelings and we'd rather have instant gratification. And this is where we started to, contemporary theory is starting to more conceptualize the dual processing. And all that that means is there's a type one, what you just described there, of the immediate feeling, subconscious or conscious, of like, what is going on? You're not really thinking about it. And this is where your past history, your biographical history, is really going to shape that immediate subconscious affective system response that you'll have. So if you are tired, and have all of these like low energy, all of these systems, it doesn't matter if it quote unquote, it's going to be good for you. Your type one system, right? That immediate affective, the psychological response is going to take over. And it doesn't matter how much information or knowledge I feed you, you're not going to want to go ahead and do X behavior or adhere to X plan that you made 4 weeks ago or whatever the time frame would have been.
And so just explain, because affective means not what probably many people are thinking that it means. So when you
Yeah,
say
so
affective, you're
affective.
using it in terms of research, which means
Yeah, so affective is just the subconscious response that you have. So if I tell you exercise, you probably already have some sort of non-conscious response of what that means. It usually means, you feel good or you feel bad toward. It's like it's almost like a vibe is what I like to explain. It's almost that gut response
I
towards.
always think of like feelings, like what's your affective response when I say Wingate test? And it's not good. It's
Yeah.
bad feelings. It's bad emotions. I'm like, oh, cool. People throwing up. You know, I don't know if you remember that from the program, watching people hurl when they were doing the Wingates. It was always like a third of the class.
It would
Yeah,
throw
when
up.
Yeah. I mean, dude, it's the Wingate test is no joke.
Oh yeah. I don't want to do it.
Yeah. But that's how I always think of it. It's like, all right, if they're measuring my affect in response to an exercise thing, what is my mood? What is my feelings with that? That's how I always explain it to people too.
And so I think that this is something that, especially like lifestyle side, there are there's a lot of times when we're talking to people and they have the goals that they want to go after, and sometimes they're huge ones, right? Where they're looking at wanting to make these gigantic lifestyle changes or different stuff. And then we bring up some of the basics with it. Like Stephen has brought up things like, vegetables, or talking about like crazy cardio, or which, I mean, we wouldn't throw like wind gates at somebody. But even just if you say the word treadmill to some people, they're going to have like that same immediate response. And so how do you use that? Like, how do you bridge that? What have you like started to like try out with people, or what did you see was successful, even with like in the immediacy, if they're like, oh, I don't like that.
Yeah, so what we are attempting to do with like our model, which is just a person adaptive. So like how can we balance how you are feeling right now and the demand of exercise? So we're just trying to titrate that. So I built person adaptive exercise programs with 24 individuals that were participants in my dissertation study. And really, how I was able to get to know these individuals was through a process called biographical mapping. And it's basically what we do as coaches with a consult call. But what I really enjoy about the biographical map, it puts your life on a visual display. And you're actually working to create this visual display. And it's broken up into two phases where phase one of that interview, we start to label this specific timeline from the day you were born to the day of the interview. And this is where I'm really starting to learn about, the individual's childhood experience with exercise. A lot of people, similar to the Wingate, was like the beeper test. Wherever you were in the gym and you hear the beep and you're just having to sprint and run, and they started to say, "Oh yeah, I hated that because I would throw up and I was super exhausted." I remember getting, my first cramp and I had no idea what this was and I was dying and all of these things. People would tell me about, coaches or whatever the case may be. And then we would have like that high school, middle school area where typically people tend to get more involved with sports. They either flourish or they aren't good enough to make the team. They're like, what am I doing? And they kind of stop playing. But all that being said is I really understand that individual and how and why they operate through that biographical map. But it's not more important for me to just understand it. What I really enjoy about it, it's the participant actually is learning and connecting the dots themselves. Because one of the things that always drove me crazy as a coach was what Stephen just kind of talked about before we hit record was people say, I've done this, I've tried that, it hasn't worked, but I want to do the same damn thing again. But when we actually put like the phase two when they start to draw certain curves. And these curves were on the y-axis was like 0 to 10 of like, okay, in this phase, like how did you feel? In this phase, how did you feel? And they're drawing these curves. So they're actually having to stop and think of like, okay, here's all of these time points across my life. How did I physically feel throughout this timeline? Or how did I mentally feel? What was my enjoyment towards exercise? All of these things they're starting to actively think about and put together and they visually see it and boom, that wakes a lot of people up when they start like interesting, like I felt physically really good but mentally like I it was a terrible portion of my life. Or sure, I was doing a lot of exercise but the enjoyment of exercise was really low, and they're putting the pieces together of like what was going on in that time frame. And now again, sure, I know those answers and I'm putting those together when I hear them talk, but more importantly, they're putting those together. And I'm not imposing on like, hey, we shouldn't do this or we should do this. They're starting to see the bigger picture. And I think that's more powerful than me imposing any protocol or their story on them.
I'm so curious if you noticed any themes with like that first half of the interview. Because I mean, it's not like super consistent, but I think it's always interesting to have like a consult call with someone where maybe they're in like their 40s or their 50s and they're trying to get back into things, and they'll bring up like high school athletics. And they'll say, they'll be 45 and they're like, you ask them, well, what do you do for exercise? And they're like, well, right now, not very much, but I did run cross country in high school. And it's like, okay, like, and it gives you a little bit of information like, okay, they have an athletic background. They know how to do these things consistently and stuff like that. But I always find it like, honestly, almost detrimental, like to certain parts of the process if they are currently doing nothing and then the first thing that they say in a call to me is how athletic they were like 20, 30 years ago. And like it's sometimes it's a red flag for how they're going to respond to some of the things that I'm going to introduce. Because I've found in a lot of those situations that they're a bit more particular.
Closed-minded.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like they have their way.
That's what you want to say.
Trying to come up with a nice way, right? Stubborn, I mean, was what was in my head that I was trying. But it's like they like, no, I know what I'm doing. I've done this before. And they kind of have like that vibe. And so I wonder with the number of interviews that you've done and like stuff like that, did you notice that or did you notice like any other themes with stuff that they would bring up in those where it was like a good like distance from now?
Yeah, I love that question because it's like informing my next steps, applying for the NCAA Innovation Grant,
Mhm.
where there's a point of vulnerability, whether that's college athletes, whether that's high school athletes. That's what I used to do, but I was like, man, you remember you didn't have kids, you don't have a full-time job, you don't have all of those things. But again, the beautiful thing about that timeline, they start to put these sections or seasons and waves of life all in line to themselves. And that was a theme that we found like interviewing people after, like, hey, like, we did this really innovative method. What did you think about it? And everyone was like, it really made me think that there is seasons in our lives. There is these particular points where in high school when I was doing CrossFit, I was able to really dedicate a lot of time with that. And, physically and mentally, I felt really good. But what you just said, Christina, when I tried to do what I was doing in high school when I was 30, 40, 50,
Right.
man, volume was high, enjoyment, mental well-being was low. So we saw, and people, more importantly, again, connect those dots because again, one of the most frustrating things for me as a coach is when individuals aren't coachable and
Mhm.
they are rigid and they're stuck in their ways, but they're in their own way. And the best thing that I think from this particular tool is it kind of sets the stage of like, yo, there really is seasons and phases of life. Sure, you can dedicate it when you were young and you only had to go to school and right after school you can train and maybe even train more afterwards and stuff like that. But it's not feasible right now. And if it's not feasible right now and you keep trying to do that, you're just gonna beat yourself up and you're encoding negative responses to this behavior.
Yeah.
So one of the other things that I always think of when like I get that kind of feedback or into this situation is the autonomy that you have as an adult versus what you have as a child, right? And so I feel like when you're in high school, and I was never in athletics in high school. I didn't do any of this stuff, but I had plenty of friends who were. When you're in it, like the real enjoyment is I want to play football or I want to, be on the baseball team or I really enjoy cheerleading. The rest of the stuff was structured that it just kind of, entailed. And as a kid, same with like school and a lot of other things, you're like, oh, well, I just have to deal with that. Like, I don't get any say about that. That's just how it has to be. But once you become an adult, you can do whatever the you want. And I do think that there is something there that a lot of people don't recognize that's under the surface in terms of they're like, oh, well, yeah, I was okay doing it back then because I was a kid. And so I was listening to my parents, I was listening to my coaches. And, they were people that I trusted as smarter than me. And now maybe I don't trust a lot of people that are in this idea that they might know better than me or have a better perspective or viewpoint. And if I don't like something, I don't have to do it. I literally have that choice. I don't have to do it. I can go watch TV. I can go do some gardening. I can go, whatever else it is that they want to do. I can go to the swingers club, you know? Like, I don't know what people do. That's like the pineapples, right? They're upside down or something.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Um, so for those of you that don't know, I think it's about half an hour north of me is the biggest retirement community in Florida, and it has the highest STD rate of any locality in, I think, the continental United States.
Is it like one of those nude ones where you go and like everyone's naked all the time?
No, it's in a retirement community, and I think it's a lot of swingers, and like they just don't care anymore. Like at a certain point, you're just like, whatever.
Florida's wild, man.
So fun side note there. But I do think that
Tangent.
autonomy is a big part of that because we don't have that as kids, and that's acceptable. That's reasonable. That's something that we're okay with that. But as an adult, I'm absolutely not okay with not having autonomy, particularly in my personal life.
Right. Or with
Yeah,
how you spend your time.
I think, yeah, based on that, I almost want to say like it's autonomy support, where when you are on a sports team, right, there's that the camaraderie, there's that relatedness, there's all of this structure there. And you have autonomy in a sense of like if you're on a sports team, right, you can come to practice and stuff like that. But I think a lot of people, when they're on athletic teams, there is that structure there. And they're able to really kind of go at their own pace, in my opinion. If we talk about CrossFit and things of that nature, certain events and distances and stuff like that. But I think what I've really found within that mapping interview was there was these phases, and people finally were able to put together that, okay, that was a time phase here. And as we're again they're drawing these curves, because one of the things that I thought when I was going through those interviews was like just that timeline. I was like, that's all I need as a coach. I'm good. Let's put this together. But hearing from the participants, it wasn't until they started to actually draw these curves and think about this event and this whatever variable that I was asking them to draw. That was more powerful for them. And that's where I think, again, it wasn't me imposing, it was finally them putting together what was going on throughout their life and them connecting the pieces, rather than I think what a lot of us have had dealt with is people want to get on stage, people want to do whatever they've done previously, but it's like, yeah, that might not work right now. And if we keep trying it, you're just going to keep hating this behavior because it's not going well for you.
But I mean, like, so I would say a lot of my experience is the opposite of that, at least with competitors, we'll say, because they're like, oh, well, like that prep sucked ass. Like that wasn't fun. Like, yeah, I got on stage, but like I had to give up so many other things to do it. Like, and they know, and we talk about like, hey, there's probably a better way. Doesn't mean that you get to keep everything, but there's definitely a better way. And I see a lot of, and this is another thing, having I think been in like the bodybuilding industry for so long, I see because we don't like to, I think, give weight to the fact that identity is fluid. Who we are changes throughout life. And so our preferences, the things we like, the things that are important to us, those will all change over, life. Great example is, hey, you're single and then you have a kid. Well, guess what? Your identity is going to change now that you've had that kid. You're no longer just party boy Steve. Now you're, okay, I got to be a dad. I got to make sure I got bills taken care of. I got, that identity changes. And so a lot of people have this identity change of being a competitor to now other things are taking over and that's not as important. And they have the expectation that they're going to continue to do things similarly or even the same and be able to manage it or enjoy it. And so they try and force that and they try and force it and they try and force it. And I'm like, we can back off. We can do things differently. You don't really seem like you're too happy with things right now. You don't have to force a show. You don't have to compete. Nobody's, until eventually they get to the point where they're so frustrated because they can't give up that identity piece of maybe who they used to be, or maybe even in part who they still are, but just not enough in this moment.
Yeah.
Where they're like, oh man, I'm done. Or, like something happens, or where they finally get it, but they fight it for a long time. And I think that's a hard one. And it kind of, from my perspective, speaks to this same issue of like, well, I used to do this, I used to do that. Like, yeah, I used to be stronger than Adam, but guess what? Not anymore, dog. You know?
Yeah, I think the identity thing is so interesting to try and get people to kind of this idea of like the mapping and then them seeing it themselves as they like write it out. It can be so important because I think that's really hard for a lot of people to accept is like, I mean, throughout a calendar year, like where my identity will shift like season to season and what I'm focusing on. Like and even just in things of like I was thinking about it recently. So I've got my race not this weekend, but the weekend after that, I have like a road marathon, and then I'll transition into training for a very climb heavy ultra at the end of the year. And even that I will shift who I follow like super closely on Instagram and things because it changes how my workouts are. And running a road marathon and training for speed is very different than me trying to climb 7,000 feet as fast as I possibly can and then go down that mountain. And I have a timeline. And so, like, with that, the way that I see myself, I've learned over time, I have to kind of shift gears a little bit or like change focus. And like, and then at the same time, there's motherhood and working and like things, the busy season is kind of starting for us. Like things are picking up a little bit. So then I find myself just being like much more like coach forward when like work is busy and stuff. It'll kind of just happen. Like things come out more often and things. And I found for myself, it's much easier. And of course, this came after being forced to watch those identities change, right? Between pregnancies or work getting busy or injuries and things like that. And transitioning out of the bodybuilding space and like considering myself like a bodybuilder was like that was hard for me when I was having like baby 3 and 4 and stuff and things were back to back and I wasn't going to get back on stage or it was harder to like lose weight and then watching the bodybuilding world, like explode with size and stuff. And kind of I put myself in that box of being like, well, who are you if you're not that anymore? If this is what you do for a living, what?
Adam, F her up and start putting her through a couple questions like for this.
Oh
So it's
God.
like shows people kind of like what kind of questions you're asking for
Oh
people
yeah. I'll totally be a
like
guinea pig.
when you're going through this transition. That I think that you don't have to ask them to everybody else out there, but it allows people to have an idea of maybe what they can ask themselves to kind of get a better idea of how to get a better perspective of what's going to work for them, or maybe some things that just aren't going to be as realistic for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, for one of the points out, let's kind of hang on to the one individual that was a high schooler CrossFit individual. One of the questions I would have asked is like, okay, what did you enjoy so much about the CrossFit? Or sorry, CrossFit, cross country, you said, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, what did you enjoy so much about the cross country? Like, why were you able to get yourself out to do those things? Or for you, maybe it was like, okay, after baby 3 and 4, what was the crisis moment that you had of not knowing who you were? Because again, the cool thing when you start to actually talk to people or in research do qualitative or mixed methods work, boy, will people talk like you just did, Christina. And at the end of, we did that interview, we collaboratively built their exercise plan that was, again, it wasn't just personalized, it was adaptive to them, right? Because we're human beings, we have different energy levels,
Right.
physical, mental, and emotional states on a day-to-day basis, even within a specific day. It was adaptive. And through that trial and error process, I basically said, hey, for 14 days, I want you to try out this program, be in tune, try to listen to yourself, and whatever the case may be. And then I interview people at the end. And the theme that came up was, wow, I can't believe I actually can turn down. Right. When I don't feel good, I can actually take it easy. Again, remember the wearable study, right? That I did. It wasn't until people were red and yellow that they may have turned down. But we started to understand, like, hey, like, what do you mean by you couldn't turn down? Well, people started really explaining to me that they devalued things that were easy, a lot of the flexibility, a lot of the walking, a lot of even things that were not 60 minutes or 90 minutes. And I'm like, where do you get this 60 or 90 minutes from? Well, back to high school. My practices were 60 minutes to 90 minutes. So like if it's not that long, I'm not going to do it. It's a waste of time. But again, the rational education model tells us that something is better than nothing, right? The physical activity guidelines say as long as you do 150 minutes total throughout the week, it doesn't matter. But people don't hear that message or understand it appropriately because they have this fixed mindset of it has to be hard, it has to be 60 or 90 minutes. And if it doesn't feel like I'm actually exercising, typically like out of breath, all of those things, there's no point. And when you
So,
try to force things that
yeah.
are hard when you're not feeling good, again, that affective component that we started off this podcast, it's not going to go well.
Yeah.
So like if you were to ask me, like, hey, Stephen, where did that thought process come from? Like, what gave you the impression that you had to do a 60-minute workout or a 90-minute workout or it wasn't good enough? I'd be like, man, it probably came from the idea that, a lot of people would always say no pain, no gain. You have these things like sweat is your fat crying. So if
Heard a
I'm
lot of
not
that.
working hard like that, I must not be doing what it takes to do what I need to do or get where I want to go to make progress. Because there's a ton of research that shows like you probably don't have to train quite as hard as you think you do. You got to train, you got to be challenged, but you don't need to be like destroyed in a puddle of crap at the end of your workout, right? And it's like, but that doesn't, even now, even though I've seen the research, I know this like intellectually, emotionally, I'm still like, yeah, but really? Because working out's supposed to be a tough guy thing, right? And I wasn't really a tough guy as a kid, and getting into the gym is what made me feel more like a tough guy, and everybody talks about the gym being a battle and us going to war and all this kind of stuff in like the industry. And I'm like, so that's just what it has to be done. And you got to step back and be like, really? Really? How does that make sense, Stephen?
That's one of those things too that comes along with like I always kind of say it like people have to like kick themselves in the face enough times before they're like, I don't like doing that anymore. And then they figure out that like, okay, well, maybe I don't have to completely destroy myself to keep this going. But I feel like that's like it's like a rookie thing, right? Like that we all go through it. Or like even when people are returning, where it's like, okay, well, if it doesn't hurt, it didn't work. Or if it didn't get me to this place, then, why am I doing it? And like
Or soreness, right? Like
yeah.
everybody's like, oh, if I'm not sore, I didn't get a good workout, even though we know very well soreness is not a good indicator of growth.
And if anything, it holds people back if they search for that. And then they're like, well, I didn't do workouts 2 through 4 because I was so sore from number one that I took 10 days off and then I tried it again. Yeah. So like I had a client and slash friend that I have here in the area who just recently returned to coaching. And she like took my breath away when we were talking about stuff. And so she wants I'm coaching their
It
whole family.
punched you right in the solar plex during the
She did.
conversation. That's what you're
She
saying.
did. Took my breath away. No, so we're sitting there talking and like she wants to get back into stuff in terms of activity. Life's been busy and she doesn't have any sort of dedicated plan right now. And she's reading something called Miracle Minute. I don't know what that is. Miracle Mornings. It's one of those. I need to look it up. But she was like, I want to start running again, but super smart. She's like, I want to start with walking. And so I'm just going to walk consistently every day, like until I get used to that and then build into something else. And then my brain instantly goes into like, oh my God, we can do so many fun things with this. And then I was like asking her about her workout equipment at home. And she was like, wait, hold on. I don't want to do that yet. If you bring up weight training to me, I'm going to stop doing absolutely everything because I have the mental capacity right now to say that I'm willing to commit to like a 15-minute walk every morning and that might turn into a jog. But if you ask more than that, like I will shut down and I will not do anything.
Here's a great point where when we did this interview, this biographical map interview, and we created their individualized plan, one, it was sort of what we call the IKEA effect, was just a mental heuristic that we typically enjoy things that we have to actually work for. And they worked for developing their plan with me. Yes, they bounced ideas, but it wasn't until they were like, shit, Adam, like, can you help me out here? I was like, pulled to Christina. I was like, yeah, we could do this. We can do this. What about this? And they're like, no, I don't like that or that, but because you kind of told me all of this, this is what I want.
Right.
And this is where I say to a lot of coaches, shut up. Like, yes, we know a lot, but we don't always have to impose everything on the people. Like, give them ideas, hey, give them options. Like, variety support is a great way to intrinsically motivate somebody, but don't say you have to do this. We can do A, B, and C. What do you want to do? To give the individual that psychological ownership, like, this is mine. I chose to do this. I built this. And with that, people will go ahead and it's not about like, you want me to run through a wall? What? It's like, no, how many walls you want me to run through? Because like I did this, I'm gonna show myself, right? It's all about developing the intrinsic type of stuff.
Yeah.
Like this is for me, and this is what I want, rather than again, beginning of this podcast, the rational education of like, the long-term outcomes of the physical appearance, the lower the blood pressure, whatever the case may be. But what's happening right now? Like, how can we get them to do it now and
Yeah.
have positive experience? So in months from now, and hopefully decades from now, they are actually healthy.
Yeah. It was
So
the
this is actually
self-awareness
one
got
of
me.
Yeah, I was gonna say this is one of those things I actually say to my clients on a regular basis and to people that I get on like consult calls with. It's like my job as a coach is not to make decisions for your life. It is not to tell you what is the right decision for you and the wrong decision for you. It is to trying to educate you and get you to see things in a more kind of overview kind of way, um, so that you can make the best decisions for yourself. Well, okay, well, I don't know if this is the best decision for me. Okay, well, typically this looks like that. And these are the things that we normally want to know about and have, in mind if we're making this decision. And the other one looks like this. And so, because I feel like for a lot of people, they can make some of the decision themselves, or they might have even this preconceived notion of one is right, one is wrong, right? We just said that about going hard all the time and just destroying yourself, not being able to pull back, but they don't recognize all the other stuff that's around that. And so when, they say, "Oh, well, I really like XYZ and I want to do this." And you're like, "What? That thing kind of goes against XYZ um, in these ways." So if you're cool with that, great. We can incorporate that. We can have it as an option. We can utilize whatever. But if you're not cool with that, then we need to look at maybe possibly some other options in terms of how we go about accomplishing the goal.
Or even like with Christina, with what your friend just said, resistance training scares me. Okay, but like, how can we integrate that slowly but surely? Like
Yeah.
reverse engineer resistance training. What do you view resistance training as? Oh, it's barbells, it's trap bar depth, it's all okay, but we can maybe start with body weight exercise. No, I don't want to do that. Okay, maybe we do, some bands and stuff like that. I think again, those are the kind of questions where like, okay, a lot of people, what I heard was resistance training um, and even just like interval training. And one of my favorite things to do with interval training isn't the high intensity interval in a sense where I'm going hard and then I'm stopping. It's like, no, let's use the psychophysiology approach where when things start to get uncomfortable and we're breathing a little heavy, that's when I tell you to turn down. And I'm sure, Christina, you probably do this as a runner, where I'm catching my breath.
Right.
Once I'm able to start to sing and talk, things typically start to feel good.
Right.
And that is what I was saying. Okay, like you want to do that high intensity interval training, that could be your challenge. So if you're feeling hella good, that will be your challenging exercise session. But something in the middle, which I would encourage you to do right now to build some fitness and capacity and tolerance, is just go at a pace where you can easily sing and talk,
Yep.
right? And then when you get uncomfortable, kind of back off and just walk, right? And then when you start to feel good, go ahead and reach that intensity again. Because again, typically in general, when people pass that ventilatory threshold is what we would say, where you're really starting to breathe heavy, that's when things really suck. So
Yeah.
if I'm
Yes.
kind of capped at that, we're starting to feel good.
Yeah. So, like, if an easy way to think about the ventilatory threshold is a talk test, right? That point where you're not really able to hold a conversation anymore, like in terms of your exercise intensity, or that point where you go from I could do this for hours and hours and hours on end to there's definitely a point where I'm not going to be able to do this anymore and I'm just going to be done. Like, so for those of you that are like, oh, what's BT1? Those are kind of, I think, more easy to understand ways to kind of look at that.
You know what's funny with that? It makes me think for me. So this race that I have in about 10 days is going to be my fifth time that I've done this one. And I have realized that in training and stuff, in shorter workouts, like 45 to 60 minutes, definitely like even shorter than that, but like up to like the 45 to 60 mark, I can work at like the higher intensities and feel okay with it. Now, obviously, like there's people out there who can run like a marathon at like a 189 heart rate, and I don't understand. That boggles my mind. I have zone two'd every fucking race I've ever ran, and it pisses me off to high heaven because I am somebody who is like subconsciously so protective over my heart rate when I'm in those situations where I get very like, I have to stay. I don't even know this word. I should know this word you're saying. What are you saying? Say it again, Stephen.
Ventilatory threshold?
Oh, you said it at the same time. Say it again. One of you.
Ventilatory threshold.
Yes, there we go. Okay. So that's just threshold. Like and past that, you're in your threshold pace, right? And I'm just so
So,
out of all of this that I've forgotten all of the big.
so there's VT1 and VT2, right? And so essentially, VT1 is that point where carbohydrates start to add more in terms of the energy demand. VT2 is when you get to a certain RIR rate, and that means you're kind of capped out. Carbohydrates are having a much larger, doing a lot more workload in terms of where the calories are coming from and how your body is producing that energy. And that's pretty much, about as hard as you're going to go. It doesn't really last too much longer than that.
My goal for this one has been trying to learn, and this goes to like the psychological like side of it, because in this training I've figured out like I can hold at like much higher paces and be very comfortable if I don't know that my heart rate is in the high 140s and 150s and approaching 160. I can hold a 160 heart rate and like an 8-minute mile for an entire hour and be fine if I have no fucking clue I'm doing it. But as soon as I see that my heart rate is like 145 or higher, I will instinctually like pull back completely to get back to a cruisy place. And then I've ran these races where I have not PR'd my marathon since the first one. Like all of my other ones have been slower than the first one I ran, and we could go into, I've had 2 more children since then. I ran one of my marathons and immediately I nursed at the start line and the finish line. So like there's been things at play that have affected all of these. But I mean, one of them I was pregnant. But like for this one, I'm the furthest away from having kids that I've been going back into it. And I'm the most fit and fastest I've ever been. And the one thing I want to be able to do is I'm really hoping I don't finish this race and have an average heart rate of 132, because that's been my average heart rate for all of my races. And I know like I can push past that, and it's totally a psychological thing. And it's so funny. And like, so going to my friend with her, it's almost the same thing. So it's not that she fears strength training or that she doesn't understand it and stuff like that. But she's like, if you put that much pressure on me where you're asking me to do all of these different things, I will shut down and disappear from you completely. And like for her, it's like she'll just pull back completely and not want to be in it. So she was like, you could ask me to do one or the other, but I'm not going to do both. And like having to figure it out that way. And so it was very like, okay, like let's figure out, when do we get to that place when you feel comfortable with like the adding on or the pushing. And I think for a lot of people, like they think they're going to find that comfort level with it like sooner than they do. I mean, I've been a runner and doing endurance training and powerlifting and CrossFit and like all of these different things that get my heart rate to super like high places, or that like, getting under a really heavy bar can be scary. And it's still taken 2 decades of having this be like a very important part of my life for me to gain comfort at like the really hard parts of it and sustaining it. And so I see where people can get scared about the intensity and things like that. But then going back to like what we were talking about with previous, like in former areas of their life and stuff like that, where they'll be like, okay, well, I used to be able to go out and do these kinds of things and it wasn't a concern, or I used to be able to do all that. And I think it's something that more people just need to see, that like it takes a long time to like get to those places. And it's something that in these seasons, this is where I like to pick out tiny things that we work on, like with people, or like when you guys were talking about like even with bodybuilding, with my bodybuilders, I like them to have something else that we do, like a different active hobby that they can turn to for when like their body image sucks or we're off season or like whatever, and we need to shift to. And like the like I have a million ideas about the psychological side of this that I wish we had time to dive into, because I think it's something that kicks a lot of people, like it can beat them up and like ruin the fun of this because they hold themselves to like standards that make no sense.
Kicks them right in the taint, right?
Right in the taint. That's just not nice.
Nobody
I
likes
think
to take
it
it.
kind of goes back to maybe the notion of updating your plan, updating your mindset, and having those actual conversations with your coach of like, what do we want to do within this phase or this season of your life? I know way back when I was able to start my PhD, I was a power lifter. Now I'm not really that. I'm just like a guy that likes to have fun and do some weird things in the gym. Try to find that inner kid because one of the things that I like to describe in some of the sessions that we developed with some of our participants were things that just made sense to them. Like one of our participants had a She-Hulk day or a Clark Kent day or a Jacked and Tan day or strong not skinny. Like whatever that phrase or saying meant to them, I was like, sure, let's put it on because it made sense to them and they knew when it was time. Again, kind of Stephen, like people know, we just need to nudge them, right? Nudge them in the appropriate way when the time is right. And we don't need to force things because at the end of the day, we just want people to do something rather than nothing consistently throughout the rest of their lives.
So like one of the things that I think is a common thought process here that's this idea of intensity and really intense workouts. And so how do you go about, like, what are your leading questions to get people to recognize what intensities are appropriate to them? Because, say, for example, yeah, I used to be a power lifter in high school. I know how to squat. I haven't lifted in 6 months, but I want to get into an intense weight training program. Well, what is your idea of intense? Oh, it's squatting 315, so that's where I need. So do you have the expectation that after not working out for years, you're going to go back in and start squatting 315 immediately? Like, because I feel like that there's
It happens.
these
Like
those definitions are important, right? And you're in the maybe it's not so bad in your research space, but you know, like obviously in other research spaces, the definitions mean everything. It determines how you speak about the subject, how you speak about the numbers, all the rest of it. So how are you getting them to either understand how they're defining that or recognize where they're defining that and how that relates to them in the now?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question because the intensity of effort is probably how I would describe it. And that is different for every single person. And I really want to prioritize that these plans were not like your traditional exercise science study where everyone was doing 3 sets of 10 of whatever. I developed a framework. And if I really want to get specific and keep it broad, it was challenge, right? And we had a 3 by 3 grid with individuals' motives to exercise, for example, social contact, health, fitness, distraction. We learned and we built those motives within this spectrum. And then we had easy to difficult. We try to remove hard, and difficult was to them for this specific motive. And how I framed it to the individual whenever I was speaking to them, easy. We'll give the one example that I really enjoyed is this one person, she had 3 kids, she worked a full-time job, and she was also a part-time student. So I was like, okay, all kids are sick. You feel like dog shit physically, mentally, and emotionally, because that's how I broke up readiness. And I was like, you got to read maybe 200 pages and submit an assignment. What is something that you can do for this specific motive of, we'll say, fitness under those circumstances? We would chat about it, whatever the case may be. And in general, the theme was, something like stretching, yoga, or a walk. And I was like, okay, on the opposite end of the spectrum, what's something challenging for you where all the kids are away, you feel really good, and it's summertime. You ain't got to worry about assignments. What's something that you can do there? And those really varied, whether it was like, again, the She-Hulk day, the resistance training. A lot of people combine maybe resistance training and cardio, or a lot of fun things that we were able to create was some sort of like CrossFit interval training and stuff like that, but were longer in duration rather than maybe the 10, 15 that was in the easy or the medium. It was like 30, 45, 60. Some people put a hike. All of these things were on their spectrum. But then in the middle, it was like, hey, an average day. Maybe you don't have assignments, the kids are in school, all of these things. What is something using those anchors? And that was find a middle ground. So perception or the intensity definition was different, but I was more of a challenging spectrum, a level for them to actually have a program that was adaptive to a variety of different situations that they could potentially experience.
Yeah, so I'm making jokes in the chat now. Um, but because I think this this is like a really good delineation where you had and you were able to like make these workouts where it's like, okay, if we're really good, maybe this is the workout we're doing. And if we're feeling like ass and we're getting a sickness or a cold, maybe this is what we're doing. And so instead of just like having this set in stone plan, and I think when you and I first started talking about this stuff, we were talking about the programming literature that was coming out that was kind of, I don't know, but I'll say challenging the traditional thoughts of like meso, macro, micro cycling, training programming and how that stuff works and what we're doing with it and how that impacts the individual and their ability to stay with it. So for those of you listening, like maybe a 2 or 4 week program, an 8 week program, a 12 week program, a 12-month program, like how are we planning these things out? Because everybody wants a plan. Oh, maybe the better quote is the Tyson one. Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face, right? But people don't recognize, I think, that life punches us in the face quite often,
Routinely.
right? And so what's my plan for exercise when I get punched in the face? How am I going to respond to that? Maybe it is just maybe it's a yoga session. And I don't want to say just a yoga session. Maybe it's a yoga session. Maybe it's a walk outside. Maybe, like that's still something good that benefits you. And so the thing that I really liked about that, and that most of my clients have a very hard time with, particularly anybody I coach that competes, is this idea of knowing to pull the reins back and chill the hell out.
Yeah.
Knowing like when, oh man, I got 2 hours of sleep last night and I have a client that they're coming from France for a show and their flight got canceled and they're in peak week. They're competing on Sunday, right? So they're still going to get here and they're like, but I'm worried about the gym and I'm worried about doing my cardio. I was like, get some extra steps in the airport if you have some extra time. Don't go to the gym. I don't want you to try and do that late at night when you get in finally. I want you to go to bed because that's the more important thing for you right now. Like, and when we talk about that order of importance in the hierarchy of how you're feeling, your health, and you looking your best, you getting enough sleep and adequate sleep is much more important than forcing a little 45-minute workout and a little bit of cardio, right? We're past that point. And so that's a hard thing to do when you have that goal, though, to be able to take that step back and be introspective and say, oh shit, like the gas ain't in the tank. Today's a quarter of a tank kind of day. I ain't making that normal trip. Like I need to make sure I plan for a quarter tank trip. And then because that's going to get you back to the place where the tank is full again. And now you can do those things again that maybe, you find more exciting, because I think that's what it comes down to is a lot of people find excitement in pushing hard and doing the stuff. At least that's what a lot of the people I work with kind of vocalize. When you do the less exciting stuff, it helps you to have more of it and to feel better about it. And then you still feel good about doing the other stuff because it reinforces that was the right decision that helped you to feel good and that helped you continue making progress.
Yeah, no, I love that because again, like the easy end of the spectrum is often left to the wayside, or what we vividly heard a lot of our participants say and struggled with was what's in the middle of that spectrum. Like, what do you mean I can't turn up and I can't turn, like, what's in the middle? I'm like, okay, like here's some other ideas. And this is where, again, collaboratively building this program with them and giving them ideas and letting them know my ideas aren't going to be great, but hear them and then take those into consideration and come up with your own specific session was really powerful for a lot of them. But yeah, I think what we learned a lot from these people of doing a 14-day like responsive training program was, man, like taking it easy, actually, what you just said, Stephen, made me look forward to the days that I was feeling really good and I really wanted to push because my body really appreciated that flexibility, that mobility, or just something that was more restorative in nature when things were really bad on that particular day. And it reinforced that, holy crap, exercise is on a spectrum. And I'm starting to become more in tune and not relying on what a lot of people do, the scale for validation, the heart rate monitor for intensity, or a 1RM percentage calculator for intensity, right? 315 can feel very different on a day-to-day basis because I've had plenty of time getting stapled on a bench press, and other days I'm pushing that on. I'm like, what's going on here? But again, we're human beings. Our resources, mental, physically, and emotionally, will change. Now it's up to us to actually stop and reflect and check in with ourselves. And that's what we do, where we encourage all of our participants to do is before you start an exercise session, check in with yourself. And we call it readiness, which is like how physically do you feel? How mentally do you feel? And are you ready for some uncomfortable feelings that could potentially happen with exercise? You would evaluate those, then boom, your spectrum pulls up on an app, and then you select, and then you go, right? Rather than, again, being married to a spreadsheet or being married to a heart rate monitor, I want people to actually develop what we would call control competencies of being in tune within yourself. Because for the most part, especially if you're experienced, you know when to turn up. I don't have a problem with that. It's, again, I need you to actually learn how to turn down and regulate yourself with just yourself.
I think what a lot of people miss out on is that being able to do those lower intensity days and keep them as like a routine part of their lifestyle with all of it is what supports the continuance of it and like the longevity of it. And it shows, like when I think of like runners and stuff like that, like people don't love doing like the easy run days. And I've got a client who started calling them, I say cruisy, like when I'm trying to explain to them, I don't always like to give like specific paces or like zones I want them to be in. He started calling them Tom Cruisey runs. And I'm like, well, no, don't run at Tom Cruise pace. That's way too fast. We just want to be very like chill and have those days where we're just going into it and like having it be something that's like more enjoyable and just for the joy of movement. And like that's what I use that a lot if people are like on vacations or something where I'm like, if you really, really want to go get in a workout during this, like do it for the joy of movement and not because you feel like you have to while you're on vacation because you're like punishing yourself. Or like if I don't go get in an intense workout, then like I'm not sticking to my routine or I'm not doing those things. And I really think the beauty of having like a fit lifestyle or just being somebody who has prioritized a lot of this kind of stuff is that that becomes something that like you crave and like that feels good. And it doesn't mean a run and it doesn't mean like a lifting session or something like that, but like the joy of just getting out and moving a little bit for a walk and like the way that that supports so many different things, I think gets lost on so many people. And like you said before, like it's like, well, what's the point? Like, why even bother? And when they get to that place, it almost shows like a different level, like they've unlocked like the next level of stuff where they're going to be able to handle other things better if they've embraced kind of like that side of things. Because that's one of the harder ones, I think, to teach. Like it's people want to jump in with both feet and they want to go crazy and balls to the wall. And then, they hit the
I think
wall.
that's yeah, I think that's one of the other powerful things with the map. They can kind of see when they've gone balls to the wall and it hasn't worked. And what I try to describe to a lot of people is like, I can easily make you sore. I can easily do that. That's not hard. But what we're trying to do is build adaptations, just like, medicine prescription. I don't just blast you with a shit ton of whatever medicine or caffeine, for example. I can give you a full gram. You're going to get the quote unquote benefits, but you're also not going to feel great. So maybe we just start with an easy, 100 milligrams, 200 milligrams, or a half a scoop of pre-workout. That's what we're sort of trying to do with exercise. So when you get to maybe a gram of caffeine when you don't know how to, regulate yourself, you can actually start to still feel the effects of that caffeine.
So what you're saying is that anybody can put somebody through a workout that just sucks and give them rhabdo, but that probably doesn't benefit them in the long term.
Exactly. Yeah,
Or
I
anybody
get a lot
could
of people for that.
feed you with, 800 calories a day and starve you into situations.
No
And
disrespect, but like, what are the thresholds or the criteria for individuals to be like an F45 coach or an Orange Theory coach and stuff like that? Like, they're pretty minimal. I just need to read what corporate tells me and scream and yell at you till you sweat and it hurts, or until like your zone is so high that you've unlocked whatever. Like, that's really easy to do, right? We've done that in the past, and again, it's encoding negative responses to the relationship with this.
So I think that, so this is one thing that, because you went to the grad program, not the undergrad at USF, right?
I was both.
Both. All right. So same as me. Did you have ICOF for classes?
I forgot the one business administration course. It
Yes.
was
So,
some
so Dr. Eichhoff was this just really cute little old lady that was really, really on it with the legal implications of stuff and what you needed to know to just make sure that you were protecting your ass, um, so you didn't get sued,
Yeah.
essentially. Um, and so it was such an interesting thing because I had gone through a certification beforehand, and there had never been anything talked about in terms of legal in that I can recall. There was never anything talked about in terms of like, oh, if somebody's exhibiting these signs, that's probably bad. You need to be aware of that, right? Sure, you had to do your CPR class, whatever, but that wasn't, again, not really that in depth. And so it was like, all right, well, how do you know that you gave somebody a good workout or a bad workout? Like a lot of those people might not even really understand that, but oh, they might say, well, if they're sore, that was a good workout. Not necessarily. So they lose a lot of the like individual things that matter there. Like it's not hard to do that. Like Christine said, it's not hard to starve somebody into being lean. Like we can do that. Like that doesn't take a genius shit. You could do that yourself. What would you pay me to do that for? The entire point is that we're supposed to be doing this in a way that's going to help you make progress towards the current goal, but also make progress towards long-term goals of like health, longevity, the independence, the things that you can do, your lifestyle, the things that you want to do, all those other pieces of the puzzle too. And so it's like, well, if you just want something that's hard, there's a million things that could do that, but does that actually benefit you? Sometimes, sure, but all the time, no.
I love that piece because right, our whole model is on balance, right? In a sense of like if you feel good, turn up. If you don't feel good, turn down. And the great thing about mixed methods research, right? I'm collecting quantitative data, their readiness, which was just a numerical value. But I was collecting that data over 14 days. People would enter it and stuff like that. I built um, a timeline again with their readiness data, their perceived exertion, all of these things, numerical data. But then I would pull this data sheet up, which was again like a line graph, and show these fluctuations. It was interesting to see some people's readiness was low and they still chose something that was challenging for them. But I started to understand why they made the decision. Sometimes it was because, for example, a lot of people love my females love Pilates. And it was one thing that I started to explore, and I was like, holy shit, this is hard. So, shout out to everyone that's doing Pilates out there, because that is probably the most underrated, difficult thing I've ever done in my life. Um, but they would feel really bad, but they wanted to do that because they knew it would make them feel better afterwards. Just going to that class, shutting their mind off whatever the case may have been, made them feel better. But in theory, right, hold up. You don't feel good. You're doing something hard. That doesn't make sense. But in their mind, that mentally and emotionally made them feel better. Same thing with certain individuals doing like sports or whatever the case may have been. Or I had one individual do like some high intensity interval resistance training thing when she felt her worst, and she chose that. And I learned she just did had a bad day and she needed to turn down, or she needed to just kind of turn everything off and do that. So again, this is just a model. And I learned how they're making decisions. And it wasn't something like they were doing over and over and over again, but they had a rationale. Typically, why, even though they didn't feel good, they still did something hard.
Did they
So
have
I
like
think
a
that
post thing? Like, did they rate afterwards, like how
Yeah,
they felt
so
and stuff?
within this, to kind of give a better study overview, in the 14 days, people will rate their readiness, their motive to exercise, and then they would select their exercise, do the exercise afterwards, and they would rate their RPE and their recalled affect, which is basically, hey, that felt really good, or no, that felt really bad.
so.
Did
So my question here is because if someone mentally feels bad, sure, that might make us feel bad physically as well, but it's different between being physically wrecked, right? So like, and because I see a lot of people like this, like, oh, what's my favorite one? The gym is my therapy, right? Oh, the gym's my therapy. And I'm like, nah, dog, like we don't want to get those things confused. But for some people, like the benefit that they get from that, from just, and I think it's really just that they can turn off. I like to think of it as like jujitsu for me, like, or pajama time murder cuddle snugs, whatever you want to call it. You're not thinking about other stuff when somebody's trying to kill you. You're not thinking about other stuff when you got a heavy bar on your back. You're just thinking about that. And so for some people, they might rate that readiness really low, but it's just because like mentally they're super sharp. Like physically, if they can separate that, their body actually feels good and ready to perform. But mentally, there's like, oh, man, I don't want to do it. It's like depression. You don't want to do anything when you're depressed, right? You don't want to go outside. You don't want to do the things that are going to make you feel better. You're like, F this. Even though physically I feel like, yeah, my body feels fine. It could probably handle it. And I think that's an interesting dynamic that some people, it's like, how do you get them, or can you get them, or were you able to even get them to recognize the difference of, okay, well, there are some days where I feel both are terrible in my readiness. And some it's like physically I feel great, mentally I feel like trash. I want to go to Pilates. I want to go to XYZ, whatever. Both feel like trash. I still want to go to that. Or am I learning how to be like, oh, if both feel like trash, maybe that's when we go to our easy workout.
Or take a
Yeah,
nap.
I think if I'm understanding correctly, like a lot those individuals that kind of just needed it to just to distract themselves. Some of them were mentally, physically just in the dump, but they still chose that. And sometimes again, it was that rationale of like, I know this is going to make me feel better, maybe bringing up that mental readiness up afterwards and stuff like that. So I don't want to make any broad leaps on it was mental, physical, whatever the case may be, but we did see where people's readiness, whether it was mentally and physically, or mentally or physically, readiness was low, and they still chose something that was more challenging. And a lot of the rationale was it was, no, I needed to do it because I knew it was going to make me feel better. Um, there was another like theme or rationale between it. And one, and I had clusters at the end of this study of where like people were like rigid, all or nothing. People were more flexible and things of that nature. One of the things was people had this preconceived notion, what we've kind of talked about of like, no, it's Monday, it's chest day, I'm doing the hard thing. And it's like,
Right.
okay, well, you didn't follow the model here. What was going on? And you rated this session that you hated it. What was going on here? And we learned. No, it was Monday. I can't do something easy. All chest, no legs. I gotta go hard. It has to be something like this. And this is where, again, the reflective process with coaching is really important, where I'm asking them these questions and they're like, I remember one blatant participant, he's like, you know what? That was actually really stupid of me. I don't know why I did that. And at the end of the whole study, I had one participant that literally did nothing I asked her to do. But at the end, when we walked through all of her data, she goes, damn, exercise is a really great tool, but I don't think I'm using it right. And she had like a nagger injury that flared up again during the study, and she had to take 3 days off. And she finally put together, after walking through her data, she goes, I think it might be time to maybe be a little bit more responsive and not be married to the program like I am, because I'm married to the program. It's either upper or lower. And looking at her data, she only did 2 of the 9 sessions we developed. And she was like, well, it was either Monday, I'm doing upper, Tuesday, I'm doing lower, because it was just like that. I was just doing what I typically had done. I was like, well, that really wasn't the purpose of this. I needed you to be a little responsive. And we walked through her data, and then she came up with that. She was like, man, I don't think my programming mindset, she called it, is serving me as much as I thought it was serving me.
I
She's
love
an outlier. Kick her out of the data set.
And funny enough, Stephen, a lot of researchers would do that, but I highlighted her
Yeah.
and 2 others that literally did not do what they were asked. But at the end, they learned. Again, it's this reflective tool. It's interesting what you do when you can talk to people,
that.
reflect a little bit about it, and explore within your research rather than just trying to say, hey, A plus B equals C. It's not what happens when you're actually trying to develop an intervention.
Did she have a coach outside of it, or was she doing her own programming?
Yeah, so I guess throughout these 14 days, you can call me their coach, and nobody
Right.
had like an external coach. Funny enough, though, that particular person is a fitness coach.
Right. That's so funny. I
So
go
a
ahead.
different one before I forget about it. Because I think a lot of people, there's a reason things look typically like bell curves in research studies, right? Because we get rid of a lot of the outliers. And a lot of people don't include them. Like because you're obviously more in that right now than myself. What do you think? Do you think there would be any kind of significant changes to what research and exercise looks like if there were no outliers that weren't included? If all outliers were included and we did, I don't know, even if like dropouts were included and stuff, like how do you think that would change the landscape of what our information actually looks like currently?
The first thing that comes to my mind is I don't think it would change much because we have a publication bias where we only publish positive outcomes, right? And I don't think maybe one or two outliers would do much to a data set, especially if we have 20, 30 individuals in it. You might, especially nowadays, we start to see more individual data plots, but we still aggregate everyone together rather than what more contemporary research is saying, collect within person data, run statistical analysis on that particular person, and then you'll learn a lot more. And then we can cluster, which is what I did, right? We're a lot more similar than we think different.
Right.
But what we've traditionally done and why we follow this rational education model is we just aggregate everyone and we just summarize everyone in this pool and we miss a lot. And that's why if you look at way back history where the whole like exercise makes you feel good, all we did was measure what was happening before and after. And we found something called the rebound effect, right? Because maybe in at the beginning you're not feeling great, but then after you're like, oh, I feel amazing now. It's because everything in the middle may have stuff. So your course you're going to have this rebound effect. So I think what we need to do as a field more and more moving forward is collect individualized data and then run it aggregated, run it all together, and then just run the data on the individual and see how different those are. And if we can continuously point that out, we can help our practitioners a lot better.
And the reason I asked that to you, because you're in it, is because I think one of the big things that we see in the industry now is, oh, you have this problem, you have that problem, these people have this. And so it really gets people into this, well, maybe I'm just an outlier. Maybe I'm just the exception to the rule, but we get a lot more of those now. And for sure, some people are the exception to the rule, but are we actually looking at all the pieces? Are we actually looking at, are we being objective with ourselves? Are we asking ourselves the right questions?
Yeah.
Are we actually being adherent to the plan? Same like those people. Um, because a lot of people hate on the research. And don't get me wrong, I'll pick apart research quite often too and be like, well, this wasn't really the same group of people that we're talking about, so it's hard to, put it on to, to this other group that's in a very different place, in terms of what they're doing and approach, yada yada. But I think there's still some things that I would say are universally true that a lot of people maybe don't like to put much stock into
Yeah.
because somebody out there has convinced them somehow that they're an outlier or that they're the exception to the rule.
I think that happens a lot when that's why I'd asked like was she working with somebody who had given her the program that she was determined to stick to during the study or if she did it herself or like different things because I think that a lot of times when people feel that way, it's because they're not thinking objectively and because they're not sticking to something or they're not holding to something. And then it's really easy to be like, well, that stuff doesn't work for me because I've like done this and that. And then so they like to think that they're the outlier. But I'd be curious if there was more information like what Adam's collecting from people and like all of that. Like you said, people are much more similar than they think they are with like that kind of stuff. It'd be,
I'd love for, and I've always said this, I've been saying this lately. I'd love to open up a journal with all of the null findings because we can still learn from all of
yeah.
that. Like all of the things that didn't freaking work, I can still learn from that. And this is where I think it would maybe open a little bit more of the gates of exploratory work, like this mixed method stuff, because it's a lot of work. But I learned a lot of things, and we were the first study to finally find people have this rigid all or nothing thinking. Us as practitioners, we've been seeing it, we've been saying it for decades. but we have not found an exercise related study. We found other things revolving around nutrition and other neurotic behaviors and stuff like that. But for exercise, we typically, again, think if you're doing your 150 to 300 minutes per week, you're fine. But we know a lot different. What's behind the curtains? And I'd love to, again, be able to have like a journal that is all of these null findings where it's like, hey, we did this, it didn't go well, and we didn't find any differences, or whatever the case may be. Because I think that could also guide research in a better direction too.
I think for sure. I think it would also guide population and what people do better, because you do get some of them are like, oh, like some of the carbs versus carbs around your workout. Does it actually matter? Like that's pretty split still. There's plenty of research out there that says, nope, doesn't really matter. There's some research that says, okay, well, it matters for maybe total work capacity and this thing. But like realistically, it's still pretty up in the air. And I wish people would recognize that gray area, there's a lot more space in that than what people put out there and what people sell. Um, and that's something that's important to realize, because if they're selling you something, that should be an immediate red flag in the first place.
Yeah.
But like there's a lot of ways to do it. And there's some people where you're a non-responder. You're not going to really put on much muscle. It's going to be very minimal, and you're going to struggle to do that. And that's thanks, mom and dad. And there's other people that are Doug Miller. You know what I mean? And Doug obviously works hard, but he's a genetic beast.
Mhm.
And so most people fall in that middle ground. And it's like, that means you need to have some cushion on where you're going to go within that middle ground.
And
Or my response to those non-responders is we're just not measuring the right things. And it's typically the physical. And John Kiley wrote a great piece on that of like, non-responders don't exist. You're just measuring the wrong stuff. Get more into the psychological things, because if you're doing this right, you should hopefully be responding in some capacity. We might not just be measuring the appropriate tool or whatever outcome that we're
I
needing to
love
measure.
that
Right.
so much, because I think people miss on out on that. Like, I mean, just looking at like transformation challenge clients right now, I had somebody who was like, I know I haven't had much change happen over the last 12 weeks. Well, she ran a whole ass marathon and like trained for that, increased food intake by like 30%, like all of these different, like increased strength, all this different stuff. But all she was looking at was her pictures, and that her weight had only shifted by like a pound over the course of the entire time. And she was like, I know this, me joining the challenge was like a waste of time. I didn't accomplish anything. And I'm like, whoa, like
What's
you're,
that?
there's
That like
so,
breaks my heart,
yeah,
because the message here, at least that I really try to portray to all of like my students, researchers, whatever, is like whatever the behavior is, that is what you should be chasing. That is right there, the outcome. And if you're learning around the quote unquote outcome of chasing the behavior, you're developing competency. And when you're actually developing competency, you are starting to actually develop some of that internal desire of wanting to do the behavior,
right.
which will allow us to have whatever physical, mental, or emotional outcome long term. But it all goes back to, again, what we've talked about at the beginning is reverse engineer. What is it? Simple thing that you have to do. What is the behavior? And if you can do that consistently, I promise you, if you're doing it consistently over a long time, you will get whatever you want to have.
It's a law of averages, right? The people who continue to try more and continue to put in the work and the effort are, they have more chances to succeed. That average is like that they're going to succeed goes up and up and up over time. Like the people who fail the most end up being the most successful because they continue doing the things that it takes to be successful. Whether that's, running or going to the gym or,
Try new methods.
right. Because, obviously when we talk about non-responders, we're talking about people who didn't put on muscle growth during a training study or whatever, right? Um, but absolutely, maybe their mental health scores improved. Maybe their mental health scores during it were so bad that they just weren't really doing the stuff that it took. Like that's the other thing, is that research is extremely specific when we talk about like the physiological research and hypertrophy and muscle growth and all this other stuff. And so that's another thing that has to be kept in mind in terms of, again, expanding your gray area.
And I think that's again a blind spot for us is where we're what philosophers would say we're positivists. We value numbers, we value those values because a P 0.01 is going to tell us if it's significant or not. But if it's practically meaningful, we don't really like to ask those questions. And that's why, again, I want to bridge the research to practice gap because that 0.01 difference may not be actually meaningful to the general public or the individual you're working with.
Yeah. What I tell clients a lot is like, well, there's what's optimal, and then there's what works for you. And so like even talking about like the carb thing and like stuff like that, like pre and post workout carbs, I'll be, tell them like, okay, in a perfect world, I'd have you eating this much like before and after, but you work out at 4 o'clock in the morning. And like, I don't want you to go do this for that long, like eat that much first thing and then not have stuff for the rest of your day. It's like, we have to look at what works for you and how you feel and like dive into stuff. And so it's like something where I get so excited when somebody likes to get into the weeds with all of this and like they want all of that information and they like want to do it the best they can and stuff. But then it's also being like, okay, but don't hold yourself to like crazy standards and let's see what is actually going to keep you able to come back. Like my friend Jelaine, like she has learned for herself over time, like, yes, I should do all of the things. I should be following my nutrition and doing my cardio and doing my strength training. But she knows that when she ramps up into this stuff, she needs to pick like one thing at a time, collect that habit, get good at it. Now she feels confident enough to move into the next thing. And, for some people, they do better with like the complete switch. For her, she knows that. And, she's been able to do that, like find that herself over trial and error over time. But it sounds like this map thing, like could super help people. I love it being that they have to be self-aware, right? That they see it and then they're like, oh shit. Like I see these lines that I'm drawing and what I'm doing. Like that's why I like to use like spreadsheets, which a lot of people will see as like kind of tedious with having to fill out. But I'm like, well, as you're filling in your data, are you catching on with like, oh, I thought I was super consistent this week, but actually it was a dumpster fire. And I need to, here's where I could shore things up with like planning or whatever it is. So I love that it puts more onus on them with, I mean, especially since you were talking about like program development and stuff like that, which hopefully will lead to more confidence with being able to maintain these kinds of things and carry it forward.
Yeah, again, that was my favorite piece of my dissertation was utilizing the biographical map, and really learn about these individuals because I've said it since day one of doing this dissertation. I don't think it would have gone as well if I wouldn't have done that because there was a lot more buy-in, there was a lot more vulnerability and connectedness with my participants with that. And you don't see that in a study. Typically, they just treat you like a number and they take pre and post measurements and they send you on your way.
Yeah. I want to do more. I know Stephen has to run, so we have to close out. But I've been thinking like I want to do even more talking about like research and things, even helping to like people understand if they want to look at that kind of stuff themselves, the importance of sample size, the importance of population, how that expands out, like, if they want to try and use that for themselves and different stuff. And so if you guys have any questions or you have any ideas or things that you want to know more about, let us know in the comments and we'll work on getting that stuff pulled together for you. New transformation challenge is coming. If you're in the challenge right now and you're listening to this, you have 24 hours to turn in your final pictures because this is going to come out on May 15th and they're due on May 16th. So please turn your stuff in, even if you think you're not going to win, do it anyways because we like to celebrate you. And then a new one is going to start in mid-June. Those tickets will open on May 16th. That's all the housekeeping stuff I can think of. And Stephen, you should run away to your consult call.
Bye.
Thanks for coming, Adam. It was so fun to have you on here, and we will talk to you guys more soon.